It happened again, didn't it? There are a bunch of new people here now. Hi. Sup freaks, it's me, your boy, and welcome to part 3 of me rewriting the entire Batman franchise for a comic I'm planning to make on AO3. If you haven't already seen the last 2 videos, which you should because I have your number plate memorized, I redesigned and reimagined the Bat family, or 11 of them, and 5 of the more well-known villains. But today, a majority of the villains I will be redesigning are a bit more obscure, and by most, I mean 3 out of 5, so close enough. Anyway, without any further ado, let's begin. So, Ratcatcher is most definitely one of the lesser known villains among Batman fans, a huge reason for that being they're not in anything. If you know who Ratcatcher is, there's a good chance you either know them as Ratcatcher 2 from Suicide Squad, an entirely original character as far as I'm aware, or this guy. Now, of the 2 versions of this character, Ratcatcher 2 is definitely the more fleshed out version, having her own backstory and arc in the movie. However, I am going to be focusing on rewriting the original character from the comics, that being Otis Flanagan, for a few different reasons. One is that Ratcatcher 2 seems to be a fairly well-written and well-executed character from what I've seen, and I don't really feel the need to make any changes to her. 2 is that because there's much less going on with Otis, there's also a lot more untapped potential for their character that I am just frothing at the mouth to get my grubby little mitts on. And finally, I just don't really want to watch the movie Ratcatcher 2 is in for research. I've heard it's better than the first Suicide Squad movie, I just have no real interest in it. Keep in mind this is all for fun, so I don't really feel the need to do things I don't feel will help expand my Batman knowledge if it doesn't interest me. Don't get me wrong, I do want to learn more about the Batman universe, and I appreciate you guys correcting me about some of the details I've been wrong about with the characters, especially in the first video. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but I don't read that many of the Batman comics, my knowledge on the franchise mostly coming from the shows, games, and Wikipedia. This often leads me to getting a couple of details of some of the backstories wrong, and while this may not change my interpretations of the characters, I still appreciate being educated by my new wave of autistic subscribers. Yes, I know what you are, game recognizes game. Some may call me a fake fan for this, and while I would like to read the comics, buying comics in this economy about a story I might not even enjoy doesn't really intrigue me that much, I'm afraid. Feel free to leave some suggestions in the comments though, and I'll try to get around to buying some of them. Anyway, while there wasn't really much about Otis's story that stood out to me, one thing that caught my eye was the fact that they were a metahuman, so, as I do with most of my rewrites, I took that one detail and ran with it. Otis was born a metahuman with very prominent rat-like features, like whiskers, which I forgot to draw, incredibly large ears, and a long worm-like tail. Instantly knowing that their child was a metahuman during the height of Gotham's metahuman outbreak, Otis's parents abandoned their child, leaving them to grow up on the streets of Gotham alone. They lived like this until the age of 11, where they were discovered by law enforcement and taken to Hugo Strange's lab. They would grow up inside the lab, their hatred for humans slowly growing and festering. During this time, they would have a cell next to Duke Thomas, and the two would become friends, often discussing what they'd do after they would escape. They came up with the thought of starting some sort of metahuman rebellion, breaking down the system that had let metahuman experimentation go unchecked. Duke saw it as more of a passing thought, but Otis saw it as much more. A promise. When Poison Ivy caused an outbreak in the metahuman facility, Otis was one of the first to break out, promising to come back for Duke when they had found a way to do so, as they were too weak to free them on their own. Fleeing to the sewers to hide, they would meet Killer Croc, a fellow escapee, and someone strong enough to help free Duke. After managing to convince him to help, the two would go back to the now abandoned lab, only to find nothing but an abandoned piece of Batman's equipment. Assuming that Duke had been killed, they would swear vengeance on Batman and all the human citizens of Gotham, starting their metahuman rebellion with Killer Croc and recruiting a few more on the way. For their design, I differed quite a bit from the source material. For their costume, I took more inspiration from Ratcatcher 2 than the original, as I felt it was a much more interesting and pleasing design. I used the same brown and black colour palette, and I liked the silhouette of the long coat and hood, but I made the coat much more worn down and added a few rat-like details. For their appearance, however, I took much less inspiration from either of the interpretations, instead going for something entirely new. Due to being a metahuman, I wanted Otis's design to reflect that, so I had their features be much more rat-like. I specifically wanted them to look like a white rat, hence the white hair and pale red eyes, which I felt not only worked better to complement their brown costume, but made the character look much less human. For their second and more casual outfit, I also wanted to add some very faint punk-like elements like the ripped crop top and shorts, as I felt it worked quite well since they're much younger in my version and also one of the leaders of a metahuman rebellion. Here is the finished character sheet for Otis Flanagan / Ratcatcher.
They have the stone? Are you sure about that? Who cares? And you shouldn't speak so impersonally. You and my master go way back. Look, half-wit, we're all waiting on you! If you don't get your fat ass over there right now, I'll force him down your throat myself! We've come too far for you to screw it up now!
The Mad Hatter is a villain that I wouldn't say is too obscure among Batman fans, but isn't all that well known either. When you mention the name Mad Hatter to someone, unless they're a little DC freak like me, the first person they'll probably be thinking of is the original character from Alice in Wonderland. Or Johnny Depp. Whereas if you mention the Joker, I doubt the first thing that will come to mind is the card. There haven't been too many different interpretations of the Mad Hatter's story, as the story is pretty well recognised and a good origin for a villain to fall back on. Now that I think of it, the only real difference to the character I can remember being made is the inclusion of incest, which, needless to say, I will not be including. I will admit, when I was first rewriting the Mad Hatter, I wanted to scrap the Alice part of his backstory entirely, as I really wanted to do something different with the character, and I found his backstory to be incredibly icky. Until I realised that's the point. People like the Mad Hatter exist in the world, and he's a villain, so I realised what I should be doing wasn't removing everything that made the Mad Hatter unlikable and three-dimensional, but I should be adding more depth to Alice as a victim of this kind of behaviour. I think my mindset was that I wanted to lean more into the tragedy side of his story, but I think his story can still very much be tragic without the Mad Hatter's actions being okay or understandable. He's supposed to be despicable as well as tragic. Frankly, I'm really glad I came to that realization because his story would have been much less impactful if I had just removed that part outright. But what did I do with his backstory? Well, Jervis was raised in an incredibly well-off family, but by no means a functional one. He was an only child living with his two very strict parents. Jervis was very imaginative from a young age, often writing various little stories which his parents saw as a waste of time. To teach him proper values, they sent him to a boarding school in Gotham where he would meet Alice, a young girl with a similar background who loved Jervis's stories. The two would become very close friends, always encouraging each other's interests, but when Jervis's time at boarding school ended, the two would lose contact. Despite this, Jervis would continue to think about Alice well into his adult life. He would study psychology at the request of his parents, being most interested in the psychology of hypnotics, but on the side he would begin to write a novel that he believed to be a masterpiece. When he finished the novel, he would pitch it to several different publishing agencies, only to be turned down at every corner due to it sharing far too many similarities with Alice in Wonderland and treading too far towards being a case of plagiarism. Despite them being completely correct, Jervis felt he had been cheated out of his grand debut as a writer, and after being chewed out by his father for his foolishness, he would accidentally kill him after pushing him down a flight of stairs. He fled the scene, deciding to try and track down the one person he was sure would understand him, Alice. After months of digging and stalking and hiding from the police, he would finally find out where Alice lived. He had imagined what type of person Alice had grown up to be all the years he had been apart from her, imagining her to be well-mannered and soft-spoken, and even featuring that version of her in his novel. However, when he would knock on her door, the woman who would answer was entirely different from how he imagined. She was talkative and casual, her fashion sense had changed entirely, she even preferred to go by Allie. After Jervis lied about just how creepy how he'd found her actually was, she invited him in, genuinely quite pleased to see her old childhood friend. The two would talk for a while until Jervis would finally ask her to read his novel, expecting her to love it. However, she instead politely criticised the writing, even finding the portrayal of Alice in the novel quite creepy and calling him out for clearly basing it on her. Jervis would completely lose it, however, seeing this slight constructive criticism as a betrayal. He would go on to kidnap Alice, his mother, and steal his father's body from the morgue, tying them all to chairs set around a tea party and acting out one of the scenes from his strange, shitty novel until Batman eventually arrived to take him down. I wanted my version of Jervis to be one of a delusional control freak, forcing everyone around him to play along with his delusions in order to stop them from unraveling. I wanted to reflect that in his design a bit by adding a few spiral patterns here and there, specifically with his mask, and an uneven haircut that he probably would have done himself. This is the finished character sheet for Jervis Tetch / Mad Hatter.
Yes, there is. Good. Surprises are better. Probably watching the archivist die. Maybe not. Either way is amusing. I think it's called a sport. You are going to try and help him. And I want to see what happens without you there.
Magpie, once again, is a rather obscure villain, mostly due to her not being featured in anything other than a few comics and a TV show. In the comics she's in, she's mostly often reduced to a background character, very rarely having the spotlight to herself, which I think is a huge waste. While she definitely has more added to her character in Beware the Batman, which I think is a solid interpretation, I wanted to go down a rather different route for her, instead expanding a little bit on the comic version of her. I like the idea of her loving anything shiny and valuable, 1 because it goes in hand with the Magpie theme, 2 because it works as an excellent parallel to Catwoman, and 3, I want to lean much further into her greed with my version of the character. I've always loved the character archetype of the greedy, struggling salesperson / scammer / thief, which you can probably tell if you've seen this shit, so I really wanted to lean way further into those character traits. I've always loved the kind of villain that isn't necessarily evil or even that morally wrong, but are just kind of a bit of a prick, because that not only sets them apart from other villains, but also allows the use of comedy much easier when appropriate. Speaking of salespeople, I thought it would be interesting if, at least at first, Magpie starts out as a scam artist of some kind as well as a thief. Maybe she makes and sells fake jewelry, maybe she steals valuable items from people then sells them back to them, maybe she does both and more, switching from scam to scam every time she pops up in the story. I also thought it would work quite well if I gave her the opposite arc from Catwoman, a classic narrative parallel move. I want them to both start out in the same place as morally grey thieves that steal for the love of the game, but while Catwoman slowly becomes a better person and eventually stops stealing altogether, Magpie slowly becomes more and more consumed by her own greed and obsession over material objects. While Catwoman slowly lets go of her material desires and begins valuing the relationship she forms with Batman and the other members of the Bat family, Magpie ends up pushing away every meaningful connection with everyone around her in exchange for gaining as much money and power as possible. For her design, I took most of my inspiration from Beware the Batman, with things like the white hair and black feather details. I gave her a rather flamboyant outfit with leather trousers and long sleeves that split off into a feather-like design. I also added quite a few golden jewelry elements here and there with the necklace, belts, and claws to portray more of that obsession with valuable objects. I also decided to give her some wing-shaped golden shades because I felt they suited the sleazy scam artist vibe I was going for with her. With her chibi version, I gave her a big feathered coat, but I also want to design another version of her where she's in a suit, as I just feel like it fits her so well that I can't not, so I will probably be doing that at some point. Here is the finished design for Margaret Pie / Magpie.
If you say what your wish is and it don't come true, well, that's a load of rubbish. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, would you stop talking about blooming pies? Focus! Hand over that map, or I'll punch holes in the lot of you. Hello, missus. We're looking for a cat. This cat. What, you've got an offer for him?
So, TwoFace is one of the characters I'm kind of struggling to find anything to talk about, mostly because he's the character that I changed the least about story-wise to date. TwoFace is one of the characters in Batman that I feel has no real wasted potential or alternate ways to go about the character that I can think of, so that led me to making pretty much everything about him the same, minus a few small details. His backstory is the same, his relationship with Bruce is the same, I even kept the same design choice of the split down the middle look. The only two real things I changed about his character were his two personalities and his motivation for becoming Two-Face. Firstly, I thought it would be interesting if I switched up the classic roles that both sides of Harvey's personality take. For those of you who don't know, which you probably do because you're all nerds, Two-Face is split into two different alter egos, three if you want to count the Judge, which I'll get into soon. Harvey, his normal side, and Harv, his scarred side. With most iterations of Two-Face, Harvey takes the role of the good cop, for lack of a better term, what with being the original identity of Two-Face, while Harv takes the role of the bad cop. However, I thought it would be interesting to switch those roles a bit. In my version of the character, Harvey is the more aggressive and cold-hearted side, what with being the side of Two-Face that was betrayed, more on that in a moment. On the other hand, Harv is much more timid, nervous, and even a bit more empathetic, as he's not only the side of Harvey that was thrown into the situation he's found himself in all of a sudden, but I also want to represent the side of Harvey that has been stripped back and vulnerable, as I want the main theme of Harvey's story to be keeping up appearances and true colours coming to light. While Harvey now acts aggressive and bitter, he truly feels scared and alone, so I want that to reflect in Harv. This also gives new meaning as to why the scarred side of Two-Face is called Harv, as it's much less formal, and it's also a nickname Bruce used to call him, the only person who he felt comfortable enough to let his guard down in front of before the acid incident. For the changes I made to his motivation, I pretty much want everything about his backstory leading up to the incident the same, what with Harvey trying to run for mayor and genuinely believing in the good of Gotham. However, I want there to be a much bigger focus on Harvey's mental state while doing so, as there's a lot of pressure on him to keep up appearances and somehow fix Gotham. When the acid incident occurs, this time carried out by a member of the Court of Owls, Harvey gains the half-scarred face like usual. However, he still continues to run for mayor despite this, trying to stay strong for Gotham and do what he set out to despite his new appearance. However, as soon as the public sees his new appearance, he loses most of his supporters, that final shallow act from the people of Gotham being what finally breaks him. For his design, I took most of my inspiration from the Batman Forever Two-Face design. While that version of the character is hilarious, I really like the colour palette and crazy patterns in the design, so I decided to take a tiny bit of inspiration from it when designing the suit. I decided not to make the two halves split entirely down the middle like usual, instead having the two patterns switch and merge to symbolise how the two sides of Two-Face are very much still the same in my version. For one side I used purple and teal stripes, and the other I decided to make completely monochrome to tie in a bit with Batman. Here is the finished design for Harvey Dent / Two-Face.
No, I'm not the other anything. I'm me. I just can. I've been coming here for a while. It's a game we play. She hates cats and tries to keep me up. But she can't, of course. I come and go as I please. Not like any mother I've ever known.
Here he is, folks, the guy most of you have probably been waiting for. The myth, the legend, the guy nobody can f***ing escape from, the Joker. Before we get into this, let me just get all of this out of my system. Alright, anyway. If someone asks you to picture a villain, any villain in your head, there's like a 75% chance you'll picture this guy. Due to this critter's humongous popularity, however, there are millions of varying opinions on how the Joker should be portrayed, if portrayed at all, and each opinion is oftentimes very aggressive. So I think it's safe to say that the task of reimagining this character was daunting. For a rather long time I was kind of planning on just making another version of the Joker from the 2008 cartoon, which is probably my favourite version of the Joker I can think of. I just really liked how much of a creature this character acted like, and wanted to do something similar, but then I realised that doing nothing new with the character was boring, and I will never, ever settle for the boring option. So what did I do, you may be asking? Well, I don't even know. Due to this character becoming as popular as he is, there is a severe lack of clarity as to what the hell this character is supposed to be. The most common consensus is that he represents chaos to foil Batman representing order, but that alone is pretty much the only consistent thing the character has going for him, and even that character trait is constantly upended. So, I decided to be a big fat smartass. My version of the Joker, to match the way the character has been used over the years, is the literal embodiment of inconsistency. He is every interpretation of the Joker and none of them at the same time. His motivation, personality, and even his design is constantly fluctuating, not just between chapters, but between each panel. I want pretty much everything to be entirely unclear about his character, to the point where I intentionally just added details to his character and design without reason so that even I don't know what his deal is. Is he human or some kind of metahuman? I don't know. What's his motivation or backstory? No clue. Is he some kind of trickster god or an urban legend with millions of different interpretations turned physical being? Is he even real? You tell me! No matter what I would have decided to do with the Joker, it would have always been wrong. If I just did the same thing as someone else, it would have been uninspired, or there would have been a different interpretation that I should have pulled from instead to make him better. If I'd have done something entirely new with the character, it would have been too out there and wouldn't be considered the same character anymore. This character is a result of there being far too many routes to go down with this character, yet all of them feeling inaccessible, and frankly, I think the result is better than anything I could have done otherwise. With his design, the most notable thing to point out is the strange, colourful squares covering up his features. I decided to add these to make it much easier to change up his expression and features, and add a lot more freedom as to what I could do with his design without any suspension of disbelief. I wanted him to resemble a messed up, chaotic collage, to not only lean more into the chaos aspect of his character, but also to once again represent the tons of different interpretations of the Joker through his design. Whether those little squares are visible to the other characters in the comic, or if they're just a stylistic choice, is very much up to interpretation, as is pretty much everything about this goddamn character. I wanted him to look much more cartoony than the other characters in the comic, giving him an otherworldly feel. I made his hair quite spiky and didn't shade it, and for his outfit I wanted to lean way more into the clown theme for him, with the varying patterns and big red clown shoes. Here is the finished design for the Joker. The voice claim for this one is a bit out there, but just hear me out.
Watermelon, watermelon. 2 murders in this town? Wait till the mayor hears this.
Looks like you took a shit on your foot. Yeah, and for lunch I eat a fax machine.
So what?
Jesus Christ, this is a fucking crazy place. Wee-oo.
Don't worry, Twink Wink. Next time we'll play Chutes and Ladders, something more up your alley.
And there we have it for this round of funny little guys. I personally am quite proud of them, but do feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments and suggest more villains you'd like me to reimagine in the future. As always, you can find my other projects on my channel, and can find my other socials in the description, and by now I know that most of you have probably clicked off of the video, so for those of you who are still here... Queen Elizabeth never actually died, the government is lying to you, she's immortal and fake her death to start a new life in Wales. Oh fuck!